What's going on, everybody? Welcome into MLS Digest. I'm Camille, your host. We're previewing Week 34 midweek action of MLS, as well as the U.S. Open Cup and Canadian Championship Semifinals. We're at that stage, and all the games matter now. Of course, there's trophies on the line in these cups. Only, a couple of wins away for these teams from a trophy, and also only a handful of games left in MLS outside of these teams playing midweek and a couple of other midweek slates down the line for the teams that need to make up games because of the other competitions they were in. And so a lot of really good matchups, especially in these cups on Tuesday and Wednesday, September 16th and 17th. It's going to be 3 games combined between these cups on Tuesday and then another 3 on Wednesday. So get you everything you need to know, player information, lineups, reacting to what happened in MLS from this past weekend, and then also, of course, some predictions coming your way for all of these matchups. So make sure to like this video down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new here, and let's just get right into it. So first up on this short midweek slate, we have Miami taking on the Sounders, and it's now points dropped in 4 out of the last 5 MLS games for Miami. And of course, this matchup was the Leagues Cup final just a few weeks back, where the Sounders absolutely dominated at home. But this is a midweek turnaround on only 2 full days of rest for both of these teams. Both of these teams having to travel from the previous game since Miami was on the road as well. Seattle having to come down from home to all the way East Coast, and have to expect a bit of rotation. Obviously, both these teams have games in hand on most of, if not all, of their conference. And for Miami, it's insane to be sitting here saying that they're in 8th, but I mean, it is about 4 or 5 points separating 8th and 4th at the moment. So, of course, with the games in hand, anything and everything is still possible. I'm not sure about Supporter Shield with the form they're in, but they're going to get some much easier matchups down the line to close out this season against some really bad teams in the East. So regardless, Miami now 2 games in a row scoreless, coming off that Leagues Cup final. Messi had the chance to put Miami ahead early in Charlotte, which was on an 8-win streak going into that one. And, Panenka, Kalina completely reads it. When you make it, you look like a genius. When you don't and it gets caught out, you look idiotic. And at the moment, it just seems like Miami is kind of trotting along, not fully investing themselves because they are going to make the playoffs in some capacity. It's just about how high of a seed they can get. That remains to be seen. But last year we saw them win the Supporter Shield and then fizzle out and just not be able to bring that same energy in the best of 3 series against Atlanta. So they might just be preserving themselves in a sense, and I don't want to overreact too much one way or the other. But right now Miami's just in such a bad rut. And Seattle, meanwhile, going up 2-0 at home to the Galaxy, a team that they beat in the Leagues Cup semifinals on the road, and then also 4-0 on the road just before that in MLS play. We're trying to do the triple against them basically, and completely let go a 2-goal lead. It was 2-1 before half, and then in the final 10 or so minutes, the equalizing goal from the Galaxy. The Sounders, who have been, of course, a lead at home all season, holding it down there, and that's a bit of a blow. The good things are that Rusnak in that game was subbed on and was able to go after picking up a knock previously, and he looks healthy and good, and that's a big piece for this team. And then also that Jordan Morris is finally back from his injury, and he played about 10 minutes or so in that last game. So a bit of depth coming back. This team has it anyways, but right now the Galaxy, of course, with a game or 2 extra in hand on them in 5th, and those are big drop points in the race for top 4 right now, because it seems like, of course, San Diego, Minnesota, Whitecaps will all be locking down those top 3 seeds one way or another, because there's going to be a bit of shuffling, it seems like, after this past weekend's results, because of course the Whitecaps destroyed the Union to gain ground, and then Minnesota got revenge on San Diego to really make the Supporter Shield race tight. So this one's hard to call. I think the Sounders are more informed. They're the more cohesive team, but on short rest and going to Miami, I just don't think Miami's going to be held off the score sheet for too many games in a row. I think this is one that they really need to turn around and at least put in a better performance. But yeah, it's one that's hard to call because you also should expect rotation, and there's wiggle room specifically for Miami as far as climbing their way back up because of these games in hand. So this is one that they can build a little momentum as far as the performance, but I'm not sure if I trust them for a win. So I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw in this one. Moving on to the US Open Cup, the first of the 2 semifinals. It's between Nashville and the Union, 2 top 4 teams right now in the East, and it looks like a very, very intriguing matchup. This is going to just be the one leg, with, of course, extra time and penalties if necessary. And Nashville gets the hosting rights in this one. Nashville beating DC United in the quarterfinal, and Philly, which had a delayed quarterfinal and played that much more recently than the rest of the other 3 quarterfinals, beating the Red Bulls in a dramatic fashion, comeback at home. But both these teams coming off losses in the previous MLS match week over on Saturday in different contexts completely, I think. Nashville losing to Cincinnati literally at the buzzer. Evander, once again, the saving grace for Cincy, which hadn't scored a single goal at home in its past 3 home games before that matchup. And Evander just scoring a banger, putting the team on his back for a bit of a bounce-back performance for that team. Nashville has lost 4 of its 5 games in MLS, with 1 win as the other result since Leagues Cup. They didn't participate in Leagues Cup, but since MLS got restarted in the between the group phase and the playoff phase of Leagues Cup, that is Nashville's record. So they haven't been, especially defensively, they've just been very, very shocking, especially losing to Atlanta United at home, which obviously only has about 5 or 6 wins this entire season. And meanwhile, Philly, I don't understand. I understand that there's rotation involved because you're looking ahead to this semifinal. Of course, you're 2 wins away from a trophy. But I feel like too often in MLS, and this season as well specifically, it just maybe it's a bit of recency bias, but we see these marquee matchups on paper between these top teams, and for whatever reason, it never lives up to the hype, or one team is always over rotating or resting players. And that was the case when Philly traveled to the Whitecaps this weekend, losing 7-0. And resting so many players, resting both its top 2 strikers, resting Kai Wagner, Jean-Jacques, and I know Jean-Jacques played for Haiti 2 games international break, right? That was right after the international break. And no Andre Blake. But, you want to see the best of the best against each other, and those 2 teams are quite literally in a supporter shield race, and the Union just made it much more of an actual question mark of who's going to get this thing by getting completely steamrolled and not widening that gap. And now there's only 4 games remaining for many teams. I think the Whitecaps now have actually 2 more games in hand, obviously on lesser points, but could definitely make up those points. And that's just a morale killer. Obviously this team's still going to be focused on this game, and this team is still an amazing team, but I just think that was completely uncalled for from Carnell. And then you sub on those players I mentioned that were benched and rested, like just before halftime or during halftime, and like by that time they're already down 3 or 4, and why are we even doing this at this point? You're playing Bedoya as a right back. It's crazy. So in this one, obviously, we're gonna get the best of these two teams. Nashville, I don't really feel like over rotated on the weekend, but they're gonna bring the energy. They're at home here, and this one should live up to what looks like to be on paper a game with plenty of chances. Nashville's gonna want to dictate the tempo, but the Union are pretty stout defensively when, of course, they're gonna bring out their starting lineup. And the strikers were rested, like I mentioned. So I think this is one that could definitely go to extra time, and I see a lot of goals in this one. Nashville particularly hasn't been trustworthy, even with Zimmerman back there defensively. So once again, I think this one could be a 1-1 or a 2-2 that goes to extra time. And I don't know. It also depends if Andre Blake is fit, because that could be a decider as far as potential penalties and whatnot. But yeah, I think this one goes the distance, and this one should be one to enjoy. To wrap up Tuesday's slate of the three matches, it's the Whitecaps hosting Forge in the second leg of the Canadian Championship Semifinal, and the other semifinal is between two teams from the Canadian Premier League. So not really going to dive too into that, but Whitecaps, of course, have won the last three editions of this, and they're going for 4 in a row now, but they're faced against the Canadian Premier League's best, or one of its best, in Forge, which has a very good record and already played the Whitecaps very, very closely in that first leg. It was 2-2 over where the Forge play, and the Whitecaps lineup that day wasn't really full strength based on who they had injured and all of that, but they're getting healthier now, and of course coming off that domination of the Union 7-0, and but they haven't been particularly convincing defensively. I know they just held the Union to a clean sheet, but I think that's more of a one-off based on how the Union completely just threw the towel in that game. And they struggled with lesser teams in the Canadian Premier League earlier on in this tournament and had a few scary moments. So I think the Whitecaps will advance, but it could be a scary one. And, the Forge will play them tough. They actually created, I watched that first leg, and there were some good moments from the Forge. So, once again, 2 games away from a trophy for the Whitecaps. They've been in the final of Champions Cup, which they obviously want to forget about. They're in the Supporter Shield race for sure now, with 1 and 2 in the West, taking points off of each other on the weekend, and then obviously beating the Union, so with games in hand. So, yeah, it's really about who's showing up right now in the final month or so of the season, and they're going to have to deal with this short rest going into this one, but of course they get to stay at home, and now they have Thomas Mueller, so they're cooking with fire. Brian White was probably not going to play in this one as well. He's been working in the gym kind of solo or training alone ahead of that match against the Union, so I don't expect too much progress where he will start this match, maybe make the bench. But they still have enough firepower. Sabi, Nelson, Rios, Mueller, and that midfield looks healthier now. So I think they'll have just enough. But once again, Forge will provide a very, very tough challenge. This should be an entertaining second leg. Moving on to Wednesday's 3-match slate, we start with the MLS midweek slate of it, and it's NYC taking on the Crew. Now, NYC has done very, very well since Leagues Cup. It's 3 wins in 4 games, and they just went over to the Fire and came back after conceding an early goal to win 3-1 eventually on the road. And that was a battle of the 2 play-in spots going into that game. And NYC widened that gap a little bit with Miami now dropping into 8th. And they do have a game in hand on a couple other teams above them. And if they were to basically win this game and the Crew are another team above them, they would jump into I believe, at least fifth, but potentially even fourth in the table, or on tied on 50. Um, and I mean, NYC has just been doing the business. I mean, they beat Nashville at home, coming back in that one as well, and then beating Cincinnati on the road with a very with just a 1-0 result, and then of course the Fire. Meanwhile, the Crew, coming out of Leagues Cup, hadn't been so hot. They had drawn 2 to the Red Bulls and Toronto, and then lost to the Revs at home, but they put on a show on the road at Atlanta, scoring 5 first half goals with a hat trick in that time by Diego Rossi. And he got subbed off before half for that, because they thought the result was obviously done and dusted, and that those were the signs I was looking for right out of this team with Abu Ali, because he finally got off the mark. He scored as well, his first Crew goal. And that's what I was talking about ahead of that game is, will this team wake up a little bit, because playoffs are around the corner and they need to get a first round home playoff matchup at minimum, right? And they showed that, right? But they thought this game was over, and somehow they let this abysmal Atlanta team, which was also rotated a bit and definitely didn't have its star firepower out there. Not that it's been showing that, but they just didn't have it, and they let them come back into this game, and then 1 became 2, and 2 became 4 in the final 10 or so minutes, and the Crew were genuinely hanging on for the win in this game. And that is a concerning sign, because you saw Nagbe as well come back after a couple of games out due to, I believe it was some sort of back injury, and he just slotted in and started right away. So that's a great sign for the Crew, but even with him in there, all of this happened, and just obviously way too much complacency out of the Crew. And so that leaves us here in this matchup on short rest. The Crew have to travel to NYC. NYC traveling back from the match against the Fire. And I think NYC has played the Crew very, very tightly the past couple of years. It was Leagues Cup last year where they took them to penalties over in Columbus, and just other games recently. They have either played them tight, 1-goal losses, or draws. And Alonso Martinez has really kind of feasted against this team as well. He scored last game. Mercado as well. They're just a pesty team. And the brand of soccer is not all that bad. So at Yankee Stadium here, I just think the 3 points are completely on the line. I think it's anyone's guess, because I'm not, as much as that attack showed me things against Atlanta, on the flip side, I just don't think they can hold a clean sheet here on the road to NYC, and I think this is another one that will be up in the air. I think it's going to be a draw here, 1-1, but I wouldn't be surprised if one of them bagged a winner. I think it's more likely to be NYC at the moment, if I had to pick. Next up on Wednesday, we move over to the Open Cup, the second semifinal, and this one is between Minnesota and Austin, and yeah, just new territory for both of these teams, as they're 1 match away from the final. Minnesota, of course, closing the gap on not just the Western Conference first seed, but in the Supporters Shield race, with the Union also dropping all three points, and beating San Diego and getting that revenge on the road after San Diego beat them in Minnesota earlier this season. And the playing that game was as everyone expected as far as tactically, right? And San Diego had plenty of chances. By XG, they should have won that game, air quotes. And yet, Minnesota stuck to its brand and got its kind of uglier goals by committee, right? This team kind of scores a little bit by committee. Anyone can kind of put the ball in the back of the net on these set pieces and all these other things. Now with Tani Oluwaseyi gone, Yabo is going to be that main striker. But regardless, it seems like they haven't really missed too much of a beat. And, now they get a home semifinal here. They won against the Fire in the quarterfinals. at home before. And then Austin, I believe it was, they went to San Jose and beat them in penalties, coming back twice in that game, I believe. And Austin just as well, kind of in flip-floppy form, right? Beating San Jose, then beating Kansas City, but then going to Dallas, and it seems like Dallas has just had their number a bit in these Texas derbies. Uzuni was rested in that one. Obviously, he made the Albania squad for the recent international break, but I'm not sure he played all that much, so was kind of just rested anyways, I think, ahead of this game because he has been a great source of their goal scoring production. But tactically, I think this game is really going to be interesting because Minnesota, both these teams are most dangerous on the counter, and Minnesota can play in possession. I think I've seen enough of that to know that they can be their patterns of play are pretty good. Sometimes it's just about the end product, that final cross or so. But I think they're not like incompetent when it comes to actually having to dictate the game in matches like this, where I think they'll be asked to, because Austin for certainly is not going to be possessing the ball a lot or wanting to directly attack this Minnesota, back five, 3-5, whatever. And they're going to be the one who wants to counter, play a lower block or whatnot on the road here, and just try to get their ugly win and get out. That's been their style. And so it's going to be on Minnesota, I think, to really dictate the tempo in this game. And I still think they'll have enough to do it. I just don't rate this Austin side. I think they've been getting by. But I think Minnesota is just a class above, and they know these kind of they're just way more well versed in these dark arts, or so to speak, than Austin is, and they have the talent and the personnel that is just simply better. And a battle of two really great goalkeepers though as well. So if this one does somehow go to penalties, then I think either has a case for making some incredible saves, being the MVP and winning this game, sending one of these teams to the final. But I think Minnesota will get it done before then, and has the potential to run away with this scoreline once Austin gets uncomfortable, if they can get an early enough lead, for the Loons. To close out this midweek slate, we have the third and final of the makeup midweek MLS games for this week 34 of the season. And it's RSL hosting LAFC. RSL and LAFC, both these games with 2 to 3 games in hand on many of the other teams surrounding them or just in the conference. And RSL did well, beating Kansas City, taking care of that business. Teams you just simply have to get by, teams that are basically already out of the playoffs. If they want to be included in the playoffs in some capacity, make that play-in game. And now they're just 1 point behind the Earthquakes in 9th. And meanwhile, LAFC beating the Earthquakes as well in Levi's Stadium, that kind of special game this past weekend. And just coming off to a blazing start. Sun scoring 1, Bawanga scoring 2. And with the games in hand, LAFC once again making a case for a top 4 spot, overthrowing Seattle at the moment because of their games in hand. If they are to pick up maximum points, then they would guarantee that. So RSL before Leagues Cup was sneakily one of the best teams in MLS on form. Since Leagues Cup, they dropped 3 in a row before that win against Kansas City. So turning around the form here, going here is never easy for any team, of course. As we say every time, the altitude is no joke. And LAFC is going to have to continue these travels in a sense on short rest. And that might be a problem because of, that short rest, altitude, not a good combination. But RSL, of course, just generally looks more dangerous now with these new additions on the field up front. Diego Luna staying in form, carrying this team, getting the goal contributions. And with LAFC, I just think there's going to be a lot. I think their games are going to trend to higher scoring games now with Igor Jesus out once again. I just think the nature of their games is going to be super, super transitional and open. And that's what I expect from this one. I think both will score. Um, and we could see another kind of after dark banger to close out this slate. But I am going to take LAFC to just have enough. I'm going to say 3-2.